It all started when my cousin, a decorated general, was serving overseas. Our power-hungry HOA president, Karen Matthews, saw an opportunity. She'd always been a shark, but this was a new low, even for her. She moved to bulldoze his historic family home, a beautiful colonial that had been in our family for 4 generations. But believe it or not, she never expected him to return early, and certainly not with a US senator on speed dial. What started as a simple property violation spiraled incredibly into a federal court case, implicating half the HOA board. Our quiet, unassuming suburb was suddenly the center of a national scandal about veteran rights. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. I'll never forget that crisp autumn morning. I caught Karen Matthews, HOA president and all-around nightmare, snapping pictures of my cousin's house. She didn't even try to hide it, just stood there, brazen as you please, in her designer workout clothes, her perfectly manicured nails, the same ones that had voted to approve her husband's construction company contracts, were tapping away at her phone screen, documenting what she called violations at James's home. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "Excuse me, Karen," I said, my voice shaking slightly as I walked up to her, my still steaming coffee mug in hand. "But what exactly do you think you're doing?" I'd been watching her circle James's house like a vulture for the past 15 minutes from my kitchen window. "Oh, good morning." Her fake smile could have cracked glass. "Just documenting some serious maintenance issues. The paint is clearly 2 shades off from the approved HOA color palette, and those hedges." She gestured dramatically at the perfectly trimmed bushes. Bushes my cousin's daughter Sarah and I maintained every weekend. They're at least half an inch above regulation height. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that James always taught me to keep my cool, even when facing down the enemy. "Karen," I said, my voice now steadier, "James is literally serving our country right now. He's a general, and this house has been in our family for 4 generations. The paint was approved 3 years ago by the previous board." "Rules change, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She typed something into her phone. "And deployment is no excuse for letting property values drop. Did you know the community center proposal could increase home values by 30%? That was the first I'd heard of any community center. My blood ran cold. I watched her take more photos, my stomach churning, as I remembered how the last 3 homeowners who'd fought with Karen had mysteriously ended up with liens on their properties. That afternoon, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of dread, I spent hours poring over every HOA document I could find. And there it was, buried in the meeting minutes from last month. A proposal for a state-of-the-art community center, right in the middle of our block, precisely where James's house stood. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just about paint colors and hedge heights. This was a land grab. The next week was a blur of certified letters arriving at James's house, each one citing more ridiculous violations. The brass knocker that had survived 2 world wars? Suddenly, not in compliance. The rose bushes his daughter planted before his deployment, deemed invasive species. I felt like I was drowning in bureaucratic red tape. I tried calling James, but military communications were restricted during his current operation. All I could do was send frantic emails, unsure if he'd even get them in time. Each day, more HOA board members drove by slowly, taking notes, their faces grim. I felt like we were under siege. I even installed security cameras after I caught Karen's husband Tom measuring the property line at midnight with a flashlight. The audacity! The final straw came when I spotted Karen leading a group of suited investors on a tour of our street. This entire area will be transformed, I overheard her say, her voice full of self-importance. The outdated structures will be removed, starting with that eyesore. She pointed directly at James's house, her smile sharp and predatory. That night, I called James's daughter Sarah at college. "Something's wrong, Sarah," I told her, my voice trembling. "I think they're planning something big, and your dad's deployment. It makes his house an easy target." "But Dad's supposed to be home in 2 weeks," Sarah said, her voice shaking with fear. "They can't just take our house, right? All our family photos are there, Mom's garden, everything." I wanted to tell her it would be fine, but I knew Karen. She had already survived 3 lawsuits from other homeowners. She knew exactly how to work the system. She was a master manipulator. As I hung up the phone, a certified letter arrived. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting tomorrow night to vote on the community center proposal. My heart stopped when I read the fine print. They'd scheduled it exactly 13 days before James's return date. 1 day short of the 2-week notice required for deployed service members under federal law. Karen had done her homework, and I realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about property values or community centers. This was personal, and she'd been planning it for months. I locked James's front door that night, unable to shake the feeling that these might be the last few hours. This house would still belong to our family. On the wall, a photo of James receiving his first command caught my eye. He always taught me that battles are won with strategy, not just strength. As I walked home, Karen's porch light snapped on. She stood in her doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, watching me with that same glass-cutting smile. "Better take pictures," she called out sweetly, "for the memories." Little did she know, I was already forming a battle plan of my own. I woke up the next morning to the deafening sound of heavy machinery rumbling down our street. It was 6:30 a.m., barely dawn. Through my bedroom window, I saw 3 yellow bulldozers and a large dump truck headed straight for James's house. My heart leaped into my throat. I threw on my shoes, grabbed the folder of legal documents I'd been keeping close since Karen started making threats, and raced outside, still in my pajamas. The morning fog hadn't even lifted, but Karen was already there, of course, in her designer workout clothes, tapping away on her iPad with that infuriating fake smile. 2 police cars were parked nearby. She'd planned this down to the minute. "Stop," I yelled, running up with James's deployment papers in my hand. "This house belongs to an active service member. You can't do this." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the power of attorney documents James had given me. Karen just laughed. That high-pitched, grating laugh that always set my teeth on edge. She didn't even bother to look up. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "The board had an emergency meeting last night. We voted unanimously to proceed with immediate demolition due to severe structural issues." She finally looked at me, her eyes cold and hard. "It's all perfectly legal. We even have a city inspector's report." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "What inspector? When? I've been here every day." The demolition crew chief, a burly man with a weary look on his face, walked over. I shoved James's property tax receipts at him. "Look, everything's paid up. They can't do this." "Suts." Karen stepped between us, her smile now a predatory smirk. "Actually, we haven't received any tax payments for 6 months. Such a shame." She pulled out a thick folder, overflowing with papers. "We sent multiple notices. I guess they got lost in the mail to wherever your cousin is stationed." My hands were trembling as I pulled up my phone's banking app. There they were. 6 cancelled checks to the HOA, all cleared by their bank. "You cashed these checks," I exclaimed, my voice rising in desperation. "I have proof right here." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Those were applied to other outstanding violations. See these reports?" She rattled off a list of ridiculous infractions: overgrown grass, unauthorized paint color, non-compliant mailbox height. The list went on and on, each item more absurd than the last. Meanwhile, the bulldozer engines grew louder, a menacing rumble that drowned out my pleas. I called James's lawyer, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk like a caged animal. "Pick up, pick up, pick up!" The call went straight to voicemail. The police officers stood by, their faces impassive, claiming they couldn't interfere with a civil matter. I felt utterly helpless as the demolition crew started setting up their equipment. Neighbors began coming outside, drawn by the noise and commotion. Most stayed back, their faces etched with concern. But old Mrs. Chen from next door shuffled over, her phone held high, recording everything. "I remember when James's grandparents built this house," she said loudly, her voice clear and strong. "Right after he came back from Korea. The whole neighborhood helped." Karen shot her an angry look, but Mrs. Chen didn't flinch. The bulldozer claw raised up, poised like a metal beast ready to strike. I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. This was it. This was the end of our family's history. That's when my phone rang. The screen showed James's smiling face, his uniform crisp and clean. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Hey, cousin." His voice was cheerful, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around me. "You'll never believe this, but I managed to catch an early flight. Just landed at the airport. Thought I'd surprise everyone." I stared at the bulldozer, now inching toward his front porch. The porch where we used to drink lemonade in the summer. The porch swing where his daughter learned to read. The window of the room where his wife spent her last days. "James," my voice cracked, my throat tight with emotion. "You need to get here. Right now. Karen, they're about to..." The sickening crunch of wood splitting cut me off. The bulldozer claw had taken its first bite out of our family's history. Behind me, Karen was already on her phone, her voice smug and triumphant. "Yes, honey, they're starting now. Make sure your crew is ready to break ground for the community center next week. The permits? Don't worry about those. I've got it all handled." The roar of the bulldozer drowned out everything else. I watched, numb with disbelief and grief, as my cousin's life, his memories, his home were being torn apart, piece by piece. I prayed, with every fiber of my being, that he would make it in time. What I didn't know then was that Karen's perfect plan was about to blow up in her face in ways none of us could have ever imagined. The morning sun glinted off the general stars on James's uniform as he stepped out of my car. I'll never forget the look on the bulldozer operator's face. It went completely white, like he'd seen a ghost. His hand froze on the controls, the claw suspended mid-air, halfway through destroying the bay window our grandparents had so lovingly installed. The beautiful stained glass, the one our grandmother had painstakingly picked out in 1962, lay shattered across the front lawn like broken dreams. Karen, who had been in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech about community progress to a small crowd of neighbors, saw James. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to visibly deflate. The color drained from her face. He walked past her without a single glance. The only sound, his polished dress shoes crunching on the broken glass and splintered wood. I watched my cousin, a man who had faced down warlords and terrorists, bend down and gently pick up his daughter Emma's first ballet trophy from the wreckage. The gold plastic dancer was snapped in half. He tucked it carefully into his uniform pocket, his face calm. almost serene. But his eyes burned with a quiet fury I'd only seen once before, when he got the news about his wife's cancer. "Ma'am," he addressed Karen, his voice laced with such military courtesy it made her flinch. "I believe you're standing on my property." He pulled out a weathered, folded document from his briefcase. "This land deed dates back to 1947, when my grandfather returned from World War II. I'm curious as to when exactly the HOA acquired the right to demolish it." Karen, ever the fighter, tried to regain her composure, waving her HOA papers like a shield. "The board's decision was unanimous, General. Your cousin was informed. We have all the proper documentation for a short." James held up his hand, and Karen stopped mid-sentence, as if he'd physically silenced her. It was like watching a seasoned lion tamer subdue a particularly unruly cub. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single number, speed dial I guessed, and waited. The crowd of neighbors leaned in, collectively holding their breath, not wanting to miss a single word. "Bill?" "Yes, it's James. Remember that talk we had about local government overreach?" He paused, his gaze fixed on Karen, his eyes like ice. "Well, you won't believe what I'm looking at right now. Yes, that property, the one my grandfather willed to me, the one protected under the Service Members Civil Relief Act." Karen's face went from a furious red to a sickly pale as James mentioned the federal law, the one designed to protect deployed service members' property rights. But it was his next words that made her clutch her designer purse like a life preserver. "Yes, Senator Williams, I think your committee would be very interested in how the HOA handled this situation." "Yes, bringing the press? That's very thoughtful of you, Bill. See you in an hour." The demolition crew, sensing the shift in power, was already backing away, mumbling excuses about lunch breaks and wrong addresses. Karen's husband, Tom, who I'd seen bragging at the mailbox just days before about his construction company's guaranteed contract for the new community center, was suddenly very interested in his shoes. James walked the perimeter of his ruined home, meticulously taking photos with his phone. He paused at his daughter's bedroom, or what was left of it. The walls were still standing, miraculously, but the roof was gone. Emma's space posters fluttered in the breeze like surrender flags. The sight of her NASA bedsheets, tangled with broken roof tiles and insulation, made my throat ache. "Sir?" A young woman stepped forward from the crowd. I recognized her as Sarah from 3 Doors Down, always too shy, too scared to speak up at HOA meetings. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were fierce. I have videos of everything. They started at dawn, ignored your cousin's legal papers, and..." She glanced nervously at Karen, who was now looking like a cornered animal. "And I heard Mrs. Matthews on the phone last night, talking about how the demolition had to be done before you got back." It was like a dam had burst. More neighbors stepped forward, offering cell phone videos, copies of emails, meeting minutes, a torrent of evidence. Everyone had a story about Karen's threats, the HOA's bullying, the blatant disregard for rules and regulations. But no one had dared to speak up, not until now. Fear had kept them silent, but James's arrival, his quiet strength, had broken the spell. James thanked each person, carefully taking down their contact information with the same meticulous attention to detail he'd used planning military operations. I could almost see the strategy forming behind his eyes. He hadn't just come home to a destroyed house. He'd walked into a war zone of small-town politics and corruption, and he was ready to fight. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Karen's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her face went from pale to gray as she read it. The local news had already picked up the story. Decorated general's home demolished while deployed. HOA under federal investigation. The headline screamed across the screen. James straightened his uniform, his shoulders squared, and turned to address the growing crowd of neighbors, many of whom were now holding up their phones, recording the scene. "My grandfather built this house with his own hands after fighting for our country," he said, his voice clear and resonant. "He taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even if the battlefield is in your own backyard." He smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a warrior, ready for battle. "I do believe the real estate lawyers are about to arrive, Karen. I hope you kept good records." I spotted Karen's Mercedes peeling out of her driveway, her designer purse, a symbol of her arrogance and greed, forgotten on her own pristine front steps. But James wasn't done yet. He had that look in his eye, the same one he'd had before leading his most successful missions. "Now," he said quietly, pulling out another document, "let's talk about the interesting pattern of contracts awarded to board members' companies over the past 5 years. I never expected to see 6 news vans fighting for parking spots on our quiet, tree-lined street. But that's exactly what happened when you mess with the wrong general." The morning escalated quickly. Senator Williams himself marched up our driveway like he was leading a charge, his face grim. He took one look at the rubble of James's home, the shattered remnants of a life, and pulled out his phone. "Get me the state attorney general," he barked. "Now!" Karen, ever the drama queen, came running out of her house, still in her designer bathrobe, her perfectly coiffed hair now a mess, her face pale and blotchy. Gone was her usual smirk, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "This is a private HOA matter," she squeaked, her voice high and shrill, but nobody was listening. 2 police cars pulled up, their lights flashing, and I watched, a small, vindictive part of me reveling in her distress, as she stumbled backward when the officers started taking photos of the destruction. I couldn't help but smile, a genuine, heartfelt smile, when James pulled out the folder I'd been keeping safe. Inside were copies of every check he'd sent to the HOA, along with certified mail receipts proving Karen had received them. "Funny how all these payments went missing," he said, his voice steady and calm, the picture of controlled fury. The detective, scribbling furiously in his notebook, didn't seem to find it funny at all. And then the real bombshell dropped. A young intern from the senator's office, who'd been frantically digging through public records all morning, came running up, breathless, waving a stack of papers. "Sir, you need to see this," she exclaimed. The documents showed that Karen's husband's construction company had won the bid for the community center 3 months ago, before the HOA had even voted on the project, before James had even been deployed. The reporters were having a field day, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust forward, eager to capture every juicy detail. One of them discovered that Karen had sent violation notices to 3 other deployed service members' homes in the past year. Another found out she'd tried to force an elderly couple out last summer, claiming their garden gnomes were destroying property values. It was a pattern of predatory behavior, a calculated scheme to exploit vulnerable homeowners. James stood in the middle of it all, still in his uniform, his bearing unwavering, helping the forensics team salvage what they could from his crushed home. He didn't rage or yell, unlike Karen, who was now screaming at her husband on her phone in her driveway, her voice a shrill, desperate wail. Instead, he carefully placed each recovered photo, each memento, each broken piece of his family's history into metal evidence bags, telling the story behind each one to the growing crowd of neighbors who'd come to support him. He was a rock, a beacon of strength and resilience in the midst of chaos. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. She marched over, her face contorted with rage, waving a thick HOA rulebook. "Page 394, she shrieked. "Page 394 clearly states that the board has emergency powers to remove hazardous structures." The crowd went silent. Everyone waited, holding their breath. James turned to her slowly, and in that moment, I saw why he'd risen to the rank of general. "Karen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "my great-grandfather built this house after returning from World War II. He used his own 2 hands to lay these bricks. You just crushed it. Tell me, what was the emergency?" She opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water, her eyes darting around, searching for an escape, for an answer, for anything to save her. The cameras were rolling. Everyone was watching. Then, Bill, who'd been our mailman for 20 years, a quiet, unassuming man who always had a kind word and a smile, stepped forward. "I have something you all need to see," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. He pulled out his phone and showed a video he'd taken yesterday of Karen and her husband walking around James's property, measuring, marking spots, discussing where the gym would go. "This was before any vote happened," Bill said, his voice shaking slightly, but firm. The state attorney general himself arrived just as Karen's husband, Tom, pulled up in his Mercedes, his face flushed and sweaty. He took one look at the scene, the news vans, the police cars, the crowd of angry neighbors, his wife screaming hysterically, and tried to drive away, but a police car was already blocking his exit. Inside his briefcase, they found the real smoking gun, blueprints for the community center, dated 2 months before James's house was even marked for demolition. It was a conspiracy, plain and simple. But Karen, desperate and cornered, had one last, desperate card to play, and none of us saw it coming. She pulled out a document, a single sheet of paper, that made James's face, for the first time that day, turn white. In his hand was something that could change everything. But that's a twist that would have to wait. The document Karen brandished was a seemingly innocuous HOA form, a notice of abandonment. It was dated a week before James's deployment, and shockingly, it bore a crude forgery of his signature. A collective gasp went through the crowd. My own heart sank. This could be a serious problem, even with all the other evidence against her. "See," Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with a mixture of desperation and triumph. "He abandoned the property. We had every right to." James cut her off, his voice low and dangerous. "That signature is a forgery, Karen. And I have proof." He turned to the state attorney general, who was watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disgust and grim determination. "Sir, I have email correspondence with the HOA, dated after this supposed notice of abandonment, discussing routine maintenance and upcoming payments. I also have witnesses, my daughter, my cousin, neighbors, who can testify that I had no intention of abandoning my home." He then turned to the young intern from Senator Williams's office, the one who had unearthed the damning evidence about the community center contract. "Sarah, would you be a dear and pull up the security camera footage from the week before my deployment? Specifically, the footage showing me working in the yard, installing the new sprinkler system, and waving goodbye to my neighbors as I left for the airport." The intern, bless her heart, already had her laptop open and was navigating through the files. Within seconds, she projected the footage onto a makeshift screen she'd rigged up using a white sheet and a projector from someone's car. There it was, clear as day. James, in his civilian clothes, working tirelessly on his house, clearly not abandoning it. The crowd murmured their approval. Karen's face was a mask of fury and defeat. She opened her mouth to protest, but the state attorney general held up his hand. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice cold and hard, I believe we have enough evidence here to proceed with multiple charges, including fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and violation of the Service Members' Civil Relief Act. You have the right to remain silent." As the police officers led Karen and her husband away in handcuffs, a scene I will cherish forever, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. It was a victory, not just for James, but for all the other military families who had been bullied and cheated by corrupt HOA boards. But amidst the celebration, a quiet, heartbreaking question hung in the air. James's teenage daughter, Sarah, arrived home from school, her face pale and drawn. She stood at the edge of what used to be her bedroom, clutching her backpack, and asked the question that would, quite literally, break the internet. "Dad, where are all my letters? The ones from when you were deployed. I kept them in my room." A hush fell over the crowd. James knelt down beside his daughter, his face etched with pain. He gently took her hand. "Honey," he said softly, "I don't know, but we'll find out. I promise you we'll find out." That single, heartbreaking question, captured on countless cell phone videos, went viral. It resonated with military families across the country, sparking outrage and a renewed call for justice. The hashtag letters from deployment became a rallying cry, a symbol of the sacrifices made by service members and their families, and the callous disregard shown by those who sought to profit from their absence. The FBI agents, who had been quietly observing the scene, now sprang into action. They secured the perimeter of the demolished house and began a meticulous search for any surviving documents, any trace of Sarah's precious letters. They knew, as we all did, that those letters were more than just paper. They were a lifeline, a connection to her father during his dangerous deployment, a tangible representation of their love and bond. The emergency HOA meeting that Karen had so carefully orchestrated turned into an interrogation room. I watched, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me, as the FBI agents walked in, their faces serious and determined. Karen tried to grab her designer purse and run, literally run, but they blocked both exits. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the sheer panic in her eyes. They started reading emails from her personal laptop, the ones showing how she'd been deliberately hiding James's tax payments for months, while her husband's construction company prepared to build the community center on the stolen land. "This is ridiculous," Karen screamed, jumping up from her chair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before our eyes. "We followed all the rules." And then Agent Thompson, a tall, imposing figure with a steely gaze, played the recording from her phone call with the demolition company. "I don't care if the paperwork isn't final yet. Tear it down before he gets back. We'll sort out the details later." The entire room gasped. Mrs. Johnson, who'd lived next door to us for 20 years, a sweet, gentle woman who always baked cookies for the neighborhood children, started crying. "You told us he'd abandoned the property," she said to Karen, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "You said his taxes hadn't been paid in years. You lied to us." James stood quietly in the corner, still in his uniform, holding his daughter's cracked ballet trophy. He hadn't said a word since the agents arrived. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The FBI had found everything. Fake violation notices, backdated board meeting minutes that never happened, and even the checks from James that Karen had squirreled away in her home office, hoping to use them as further proof of his negligence. The local news crews outside were having a field day. HOA president faces federal charges in veteran property scheme was already running across the bottom of every TV screen in town. Senator Williams had made sure this story wouldn't get buried. He was a man of his word. But the biggest shock came when they arrested Karen's husband, Tom, at his office. It turned out the community center plans included luxury condos that would have made them millions. They'd been planning this for years, meticulously targeting the homes of deployed service members, knowing they wouldn't be able to fight back. It was a cold, calculated, and utterly despicable scheme. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers, reporters, building inspectors, and support from all corners of the country. 7 HOA board members faced criminal charges. Karen and her husband were looking at serious prison time for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act. They'd messed with the wrong family, the wrong community, and most importantly, the wrong general. But the real victory wasn't watching Karen being led away in handcuffs or seeing her McMansion go up for sale when they couldn't afford their fancy lawyers. No. The real victory was watching our community come together, stronger and more united than ever before. Veterans from 3 states showed up, volunteering their time and skills, bringing tools and supplies. Local businesses donated materials, lumber, concrete, paint, everything we needed to rebuild. Even the mayor came by, rolling up his sleeves and helping to lay the foundation for James's new home, the same colonial style that Karen had so vehemently despised. The Historical Society fast-tracked its protection, along with 6 other veteran-owned properties in our neighborhood. We were building more than just a house. We were building a testament to resilience, to community, to the unwavering spirit of those who serve. Today, I'm sitting on James's new front porch, watching his daughter, Sophie, practice ballet in the yard. The house looks almost exactly like the old one, but it's better. Built with love, with purpose by people who understand what service and sacrifice truly mean. There's a new wall in the kitchen where Sophie's height marks are growing, right next to the shadow box, holding pieces of the old house we managed to salvage, a tangible reminder of the past, and a symbol of hope for the future. Karen's community center never happened. Instead, that land became a memorial park, honoring local veterans. Sometimes, when I walk by, I see families having picnics, children playing, laughter echoing through the air, where Karen had envisioned only profit and greed. Sophie loves the playground equipment, ironically donated by the same construction companies that had turned down Karen's shady, under-the-table contracts. James never brags about how he brought down a corrupt HOA board. He just smiles, a quiet, knowing smile, when new neighbors ask about the small piece of his old front door, framed and hanging beside his medals. It's a reminder, he tells them, that home is worth fighting for. The FBI investigation is still ongoing, and they've already found similar schemes in other neighborhoods, a chilling reminder of the widespread nature of this type of predatory behavior. But here's the thing that really gets me. The thing that makes all the heartache and struggle worthwhile. Last week, I saw Karen's son volunteering at the Veterans Food Bank downtown. He looked me in the eye, his face filled with genuine remorse, and said, "I'm sorry for what my parents did." Maybe that's the best victory of all, knowing that sometimes, even in the darkest of circumstances, justice comes with a chance for healing, for redemption, for a new beginning. I never expected our story to change so many lives, but that's exactly what happened. After a video of Karen's arrest went viral, my phone started ringing non-stop. Calls coming in from military families across the country, each sharing their own harrowing HOA horror stories. James looked at me over his morning coffee, his eyes filled with that familiar, determined glint, and said, "We need to help them, all of them." The news crews might have packed up and left our street, But we were just getting started. With James's military connections and my experience meticulously documenting Karen's schemes, we created the Homeowners Defense Alliance. Every week, more veterans joined our cause, sharing their own battles with unfair HOA boards who tried to bully them while they served overseas. Karen's replacement on the HOA board, a retired Marine named Mike, a true patriot, discovered something very interesting in the old files. Our neighborhood wasn't the only target. Karen's husband's construction company had been eyeing properties in 3 other military communities, and each time the same sickening pattern emerged. Suddenly strict enforcement of minor violations, lost paperwork, and suspiciously quick demolition votes while homeowners were deployed. It was a coordinated, multi-state operation. I watched James transform our dining room into a command center with maps showing HOA trouble spots across the country pinned to every wall. It was like watching him plan a military campaign. But this time, the enemy was greed and corruption, and the weapons were legal documents, community support, and the unwavering spirit of American veterans. The senator who helped us, inspired by our fight, started drafting new laws to protect military families from predatory HOA practices. They named it the Matthews Act. Oh yes, we made sure Karen's name would be forever linked to the solution, not just the problem. The real surprise, though, the moment that truly brought tears to my eyes, came when Karen's teenage daughter visited us one afternoon. She was crying, clutching a box of old photos she'd salvaged from our dumpster before the demolition. "Mom never told me these were in there," she whispered, her voice trembling, handing James a dusty album filled with his daughter's baby pictures, pictures we thought were lost forever. Sometimes, the most beautiful things, the most unexpected acts of kindness, come from the most unlikely places. Last week, we celebrated the first victory of our Homeowners Defense Alliance. A young Army nurse in Texas called us, her voice filled with fear and frustration. Her HOA was trying to fine her $100 per day for a flagpole her late father, a Vietnam veteran, had installed before she deployed. James made some calls. I drafted some strongly worded letters, and suddenly that HOA board wasn't so brave anymore. The flag still flies proudly, and now there's a precedent, a legal shield for others to follow. Remember that community center Karen wanted so badly? The land sits empty now, but not for long. James, in a move that surprised no one who knew him, donated it to create affordable housing for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. The first families move in next month, and guess who volunteered to help them settle in? Karen's daughter. She says she wants to make things right. People ask me if I'm still angry about what happened. Honestly, I'm grateful. Without Karen's greed, her arrogance, her utter disregard for the law and for human decency, we might never have discovered how many other military families needed help. We might never have built this amazing community of supporters, this network of warriors who look out for each other while our heroes serve overseas. And James's daughter might never have learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes losing your home helps you build something even better, something stronger, something that truly matters. Speaking of James, he just walked in, his face beaming, with another stack of case files and that determined look in his eyes. There's a retired Navy SEAL in Florida whose HOA is trying to ban his service dog. And, well, let's just say Karen taught us exactly what to do about bullies who mess with the wrong veterans. Want to guess how this one ends? This story highlights the importance of community, vigilance, and standing up for what's right, especially for those who serve our country. It demonstrates that even seemingly small acts of injustice can have far-reaching consequences, and that even the most powerful and corrupt individuals can be brought to justice when people unite and fight for what they believe in. It is a reminder that home is not just a building, it consists of the memories, values, and people. What are your thoughts on this incredible story? Share your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories and updates.